We're going to start out this afternoon. Dave's idea. He's brave. He doesn't have a manuscript for this, so here we go. He wanted to open up an opportunity for you to do some questions if you would like. And so I've got the microphone. If you have a question for Dave, I don't see any, so let's go ahead and go to your session. I'll run around. You can ask Dave your question.
And you might think of things that might pertain to more than just you.
Yeah.
Hey, how about a hand for Jason and Haley for leading in worship?
Mr. Rhodes. This is kind of scary, but here we go.
You won't let me have that microphone. When you were talking about how can I reach the lost, and they're sometimes oblivious to being lost, should we err on the side that we should expect them all to be lost and work our way from there?
Yeah, I think if I could give you one key word, it would be the word intentionality. And if I put another word right behind it, it would be urgency. And I've found that the older I get and the more funerals I do and the more people I see who pass away in strange circumstances at a younger age than normal, I don't like to just take for granted that a person has a walk with Christ unless I hear them verbalize that. And so, yes, I think you're intentional about it and you look for those opportunities. And I like to say, just point blank to a person, is that something that you've ever done? Have you made Christ the Lord of your life? Or do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? I think that so many of the unchurched world and so many of the church world believe that it's a good works thing and that they earn their way to heaven. And so I like to kind of point blank at times just ask a person and call the question. Oh, I don't know if that helps you any, but those two words would be key words to me: intentionality and urgency.
Dave, I already asked you this question, but as far as your knowing what you believe, I just wanted you to comment on like room for doubt, and then specifically in my role of discipling like high schoolers and what that looks like as far as, discipling someone when you're doubting things yourself.
Yeah, we got to talk briefly, Micah and I, and when you think about doubt, I think for years, I always thought that doubt was a really bad thing. And then I started reading the New Testament, and I see John the Baptist, and John the Baptist, first cousin of Jesus, and a guy who, by all means, should have had more evidence and more reason to believe that Jesus was the Christ. And yet when he's in prison and things have turned and it's looking rough for him, that's when he sends those people and they come to Jesus and ask the question. And if I'm remembering correctly, what Jesus says is a quote from the Old Testament. And he goes through, telling the blind can see, the deaf can hear, the lame can walk, the lepers being healed. But in that same list that he quotes, the verse that he quotes, he leaves one thing out. You know what it is? Prisoners will be freed. So he's sending a message to John the Baptist that, okay, I am the Messiah. These are all the things that said would match the Messiah, and they're all happening. But I got bad news for you, John the Baptist. You're not going to be freed. And maybe that's what he was communicating, maybe not. But the most powerful part of the story, and I got goosebumps right now just thinking about it, the most powerful part is what Jesus says when he leaves. Because you would think that Jesus would say, I cannot believe that just happened. I mean, that's probably what I would have said. I would have said, I cannot believe that just happened. That he doubts me. He's questioning. He's wondering. But that's not what he says. Instead, as they walk away, he says, I tell you, there's no one born of woman greater than John the Baptist. That's Moses. That's Abraham. That's King David. That's his mother Mary. And John the Baptist is better than all of them. Okay? So what that tells me is doubt is okay if you play out Jeremiah 29:13. If you seek me, you will find me if you seek me with all of your heart. And so doubts aren't bad as long as they lead you in a pursuit of the truth. And I think that's what, if I were discipling a high school group and I was going through a season of, where I might not have all the answers or something wasn't clear, not that I ever have all the answers, I don't mean that. But if there was something that I was hung up on, I'd say, you know what? Doubt is digging me deeper into God's word and causing me to study it. If you look at some of the greatest apologists, they came to faith because of doubt. And it wasn't a won't believe, it was a can't believe because they didn't have enough evidence they didn't feel like. And there's a difference between can't believe and won't believe. And I don't think that somebody who's in the process of a season of doubt, who's a Christian, is in that won't believe. I think they're in the can't believe, and they're trying to decipher evidence. So, thank you. Thanks for what you're doing.
How do you balance preaching to mature Christians and preaching to the ones that are just beginning to seek?
Well, that's a great question, and that's what I lived at Southeast. Was we would always have a ton of people who were visiting and were questioning and seeking and investigating, and so you kind of at times write your sermon in two different ways. And what you're doing when you come to parts that are Christianese or they're things that I know is going to throw off a person that isn't a believer, I'll just very clearly say, okay, your Bible is Old Testament and New Testament. Your Old Testament is Jesus is coming. The Gospels of the New Testament, Jesus is here. And the books after that, Jesus is coming again. Jesus is coming, Jesus is here, Jesus is coming again. And in the New Testament, and I'll help them find a verse if they want to look it up. I'll say, this is the third book of the Bible. This is in Leviticus, or this is, in the Psalms. So you take your Bible and let it fall right to the middle, and the odds are pretty good you're going to be in Psalms. So I like to try to say things like that. Why do I say that? Because this is the most evangelistic opportunity that I will have. I will have a much better chance of taking them a step deeper when they are in a crowd than having a one-on-one opportunity with them. And so I'm trying to touch both if I can, but I don't want that person who's visiting to feel like a loser because they don't have a clue what I'm talking about. So when I talk about Peter, I might say on a Sunday morning message, I might say, Peter, who was also called Simon Peter, was one of the 12 disciples that followed Jesus, and he's probably the best known. So I'll say those things on a Sunday morning when we used to have a Wednesday night service, or if I'm in a man challenge setting where it's all men and they've been studying the Bible for years, I'm not going to go through that detail and say those things. But I always say that the burden is on the mature Christian. The burden is on the mature Christian to realize, okay, I'm a mature Christian. I can find some ways that I can deepen. I can get involved in a Bible study. I'll put it this way. Let me be real blunt. I have a hard time when mature Christians will say, you know what, I just don't feel like the sermons are going deep enough for me. I've been a Bible-believing Christian for 30 years, and I just don't feel like it's in depth. Well, you're a mature Christian. You've been walking with Christ for 30 years. Then we have some different avenues that you can go down where you can get into a deeper Bible study. But don't expect me to do that on the weekend service, because that weekend service, as I see it, is oftentimes scattering the seed out there and throwing the net out as wide as we can. So that's the way I tried to do it, and I was at a church where I think people felt more comfortable inviting someone because they knew their person wasn't going to feel stupid by something, made to feel stupid by something that was said. Does that make sense? where in a sense, I try to help explain that, or I'll say something like, hey, we've got a class. If some of this, you feel like this is going over your head, or, maybe you're wondering about, how the Bible is laid out, or some of these characters that we're talking about from the Old Testament in this series, please check out this class that we have for, if you want to go deeper. Or here's a good Bible study that we can recommend for you to go through. But that's kind of how I've approached it. Great question. So he's saying, what are some things for churches in the area that we can be looking out into the future, 5 years, 10 years? And the first thing that jumps out at me is, I can't sit down to talk about this. It's the latest results from George Barna's report, and it's about Gen Z. And I'll start crying again, because Gen Z is ages 12 to 28. And for the very first time in, I don't know how many years, it's like 70 or 100 years, for the very first time, we have a generation who is more open to spiritual truth than the previous generation was. Let me say it another way. In the past, every single generation has had less spiritual interest and openness than the previous one. And now all of a sudden, the 12 to 28-year-old group is saying, well, we're willing to listen. Did you know of, I want to make certain, I'm going to be close on this, I might not have it exactly right, but asking people 13 to 18 who are Christians, their openness to be willing to go abroad to share the gospel and mission, their openness to that was around 53%. So I'm just telling you, yes, we always hear about, that younger generation, they're really out there. They're so far away from God. Yeah, a lot of them are. No question, a lot of them are. But there's something that has happened, and there have been revivals that have been taking place on colleges, secular colleges, large universities. I've never seen anything like the college playoffs this year with the 12 teams. Every single game, after every single game, somebody was given testimony to Jesus Christ. And in a lot of cases, it didn't matter which team won, because somebody was going to give a testimony for the Lord. It didn't matter which team. Somebody was going to do it, whoever was interviewed. So you say, what would I be thinking about? I would be trying to figure out how, as a church, we can pour more into the next generation and really sink our teeth into pursuing them. That's about as blunt as I can be. So, thank you for the question.
What advice do you give to someone who is just starting out in their walk with Christ more to be able to evangelize to people?
Well, somebody is new to their walk with Christ. They're the best evangelists because it's fresh. The problem is that the longer a person is a Christian, the less they hang out with non-Christians. And so the beauty of that is when a person comes to Christ, there is a freshness, there is an excitement. And that person, that individual, I'll say you have that opportunity to be able to reach out, because in a sense, you're closer to those old friendships. And the longer a person is a Christian, the more they get inculcated into the Christian community. What was it John Stott used to call it? Rabbit hole Christianity. We hop out of our rabbit hole and we run to our Christian school. And then after that, we go to our Bible study group that we have. And then after that, we go back into our hole and we go back home. And then after that, the next morning, we start it all over again. And we have all of our Christian activities, and we don't spend any time with non-Christians. That's why we talked a little earlier. I didn't go in as much detail on it, but I think it's just conversations. I think the greatest way to evangelize is by asking questions. And it's less threatening, and there comes a point when you can ask enough questions about spiritual beliefs that then logically the person will turn the question back on you. You know, there's an old method of evangelism of asking about a person's spiritual beliefs and then asking this question, saying, if what you were believing wasn't true, would you want to know it? And ask that question. And then lots of times, sometimes they'll say, no, I wouldn't want to know it. Okay, all right. And then it usually doesn't stick because they say, well, you're going to tell me anyway, right? No, you haven't given me permission. I'm not going to do something until you give me permission to do that. So it's on their terms and it's not on your terms. But I do think questions is the most disarming way. And, you know, to Chelsea's question, when a person comes to faith in Christ, they have a boldness that sometimes we don't have the longer we're a Christ follower. And that kind of, Satan just kind of chips away at our boldness, I feel like. And yet, that new believer has that excitement and they have this newfound faith and they can't wait to tell people about it. And so I think it's one of those situations where take advantage of it. A person who is listening to what you have to say might say, well, you know what, I can't stand that church, or I don't like that preacher, or I had a bad experience with church. They can deny all those different things. They can say they don't like those things, but what they can't deny is your experience and what you've experienced. And that's what you want to get back to. I say it lots of times this way when I will preach on sharing your story. I break it into 3 parts. I was, then God, and now. So if you're asking your church to share their faith with people this next week, or you're asking your youth group to do that, say, okay, what would that look like? Well, just format it that way. I was, then God, or but God, either one, and then God, and now. So mine might be as simple as this. I was raised in the church, and I was brought to church all the time. And the longer I was a Christian, the more I felt like I was a Christian and I was going to go to heaven because of the way that I lived and that I was a good kid. But in time, I realized that being good isn't good enough because heaven is a perfect place. And I had sin in my life. And so then God introduced a fresh relationship with him where I realized and finally began to understand his grace. And now that I've experienced his grace, I've experienced his forgiveness, I can't wait to tell other people about it because I want them to have that same experience and I want them to have the hope of eternity. So sometimes it's just as simple as just laying out those 3 sections and then coming alongside and then modeling that for your youth group or modeling that for your life group. And sometimes what I'll do when I do that with a group is I'll say, I think I did it one time on a Wednesday night, I did it in church, and I forced their hand to share their testimony with the person next to them. And I said, there's no preparation. You don't need any preparation for this. If I came over to your house, if I came to Elizabeth's house and she started showing me around, she didn't say an hour before I came, oh, you know what I've got to do? Let's see now. Okay, now that picture was, okay. Okay, I remember when that was taken. I remember what was going on. Okay, and now this is my kids' rooms here. Okay, you don't have to do that because it's second nature. She's lived it. It's her house, right? It's her home. So it's the same way with your testimony. All you're doing is telling your story of this is what I've experienced. And what I'll do sometimes is I'll just say, okay, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. You got a minute to get to know the person next to you. Divide up in 2s. And now I want one of you to be bold and say, I'll go first. And then try to do that. I was, but God, and now. In fact, you know what? Let's do it at your table right now. Okay? Match up in 2s. Okay? Pick a partner at your table. Yeah, you 2 are stuck together. You're right. Get matched up. If you're solo, find another solo. If you're sitting by yourself, find somebody. This is a 60-second testimony. This is not it was a cold, windy day when the doctor slapped me on my behind and I cried out for the very first time. No, you got 60 seconds to share your faith. You find one person to start. I was, then God, and now. It's all yours. You know, I really feel like that's important. And the fact that you just did it, now you know how you felt when I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. And you're like, oh, I really don't want to do this. But here's my point. And this is what the times I have done that in worship, this is what I've said. I've said, if you can't do it with Christians, do you really think you're going to be able to do it with non-Christians? I mean, this person is cheering you on. They're wanting you to do well because they're the next person. They want it to go well for them too. But my point is, if you can't do it with a Christian person, then the odds of this week when God crossed your path with somebody of your stepping up and doing that, pretty unlikely. So just use something like that. Chelsea, thank you for the question and opportunity to springboard off of that. So now I have about 50 minutes worth of material, and I don't want to go that long. So I'm going to talk about some habits that are healthy for leaders. Okay? I feel like this will touch every single one. Those of you who don't speak or communicate to groups, you were very kind to indulge us on that last session. But let me just take the next 30 minutes. We'll end this one a little bit later. I'm going to have David Upchurch who's going to come up at the end of this and share for just a few minutes. On the last session, that 2 o'clock session, we'll probably start it at about 2:15 or 2:30. I'm only going to talk for 30 minutes. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk about heaven. I've been going back and forth on, pulling all sorts of different ideas. I brought a whole bunch of material with me, and I finally landed on, I think I'd like to talk about heaven. I'd like for us just to wrap up and end with just being excited about where we're going and what we're going to do. Okay? So that's coming up. But right now, let's talk about some habits of leadership. First habit, exceptional leaders continually model humility. Exceptional leaders continually model humility. I want you to think for just a second of maybe your favorite leader or somebody who has really had an impact on you leadership-wise. And the odds are good that they are a person of humility because that is what attracted you to even be willing to listen to them. My mom used to say, humility is like underwear. You need to have it, but don't call attention to it. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 2 says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. And one of the things that I see with pastors of all sizes of churches, the longer they're in ministry, I just have a hard time with it. I just see sometimes this spirit of entitlement. And I even see it with the key volunteers within the church and staff members who they can get so territorial over something. And I just don't think that's the spirit of Christ. Real bluntly, I just don't think that is. Now, Matthew 23:12, I think it is, it says, God opposes the proud, but God gives grace to the humble. Y'all know that verse, right? God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. So if you think about that, God opposes, so God is in opposition. So that means that if I choose to be prideful in my life, in my position, wherever it is that God has planted you, if I choose to be prideful, what I am saying is I am willing to go up against God. I am on the other team because God opposes the proud. He's told us which side he's on. He's on the side with humility, okay? Think about the widow's mite, the woman that gave, they're standing there near the trumpet-shaped receptacle in the temple treasury there where people would come up and they'd put their gifts in, so they'd take their $100 bill and they would get it changed into quarters, so it'd make a longer sound. And the louder and the longer the sound, the bigger the gift. So people standing around, you'd hear blank, 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 blank. Blank, 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 blank. Then all of a sudden you hear blank, 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 and every head would, what? What's going on? Oh, wow. Oh. And that person would proudly be putting all their money in and enjoy the sound that it made for everyone to hear. And then this woman comes up, this widow. We call it the widow's mite. I don't know why we call it the widow's mite, because it's not singular, it's plural. She takes 2 copper coins. 2. That's important to the story, because she could have kept one for herself. She drops 2 in, goes, bing. Disciples don't even notice it. And Jesus says, that woman, she gave more than all of them did, because she gave all that she had. Okay? That's what we want. God says, I'm on the side of the humble. I'm on the side of the person that's trying not to make a show about this, but is just faithfully doing their work, whether there's any fanfare, whether anybody notices or not. And I think at times we have to lean into our weaknesses. You know, that passage in 2 Corinthians where Paul talks about my grace, the Lord saying, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. You know, Paul's talking about his thorn in the flesh, right? We don't know what that thorn was. We don't know what that was. People, you know, malaria, eyesight, you know, lactose intolerant, you know, who knows, right? That was a joke, by the way. I won't use that next hour, okay? So what's happening there? Well, he says, I finally had to find out that in my weakness, that's when I'm strong, because Christ's power is made perfect in my weakness. I've found that when I pull the veil back a little bit and I'm vulnerable and I'm authentic and I tell my church or I tell my Bible study group about the struggles that I'm having, they lean in. They don't say, oh, gosh, I could never listen to that guy again. Phew, wait. He said a bad word the other day when somebody cut him off. I can't believe I can't listen to that guy. No, I think that people actually say, oh, gosh, I did the same thing this week. And it didn't even bother me. And it bothered him. But what are you going to do from then on? Are you going to learn from that? Are you going to be held accountable? Are you going to work so that you're doing better? So I like it when a leader will share some of their weaknesses and show that they're vulnerable. And my experience has been that when you do that, it actually elevates your leadership opportunities that you have. When I took over the lead at Southeast, I'd waited for 17 years. That's a long time. I didn't wait all that time, but publicly it had been made known about 7 years before. And then I became the lead pastor. And I'd been chomping at the bit, and I couldn't wait for it. And if you've ever been to Southeast, it's along I-64. It's a humongous facilities, over 1 million square feet, and in the buildings that you can see there as you drive by. And I couldn't wait to become the lead pastor. Then I became the lead pastor. And the church had grown 39 out of 40 years. And then it was handed to me. And it went in the first year from 18,000 to 17,000. And we dropped 1,000 people in my first year. And, you know, I mean, what are you going to say? You know, hey, Dave solved the parking problem. Great. Yeah. By the way, that's truth and surprise, in case you're keeping notes, okay? Truth and surprise right there. But, you know, I mean, you talk about a downer. Craig Groeschel says, don't puff yourself up, or don't run yourself down when the numbers go down, because if you do, you'll be tempted to puff yourself up when the numbers go up. You know, God's doing his work. Now I look back, man alive, if those 1,000 people hadn't left, we never would have gone to 27,000, because those 1,000 people would have been holding us back. Sometimes you have to subtract in order to be able to add. Does that make sense? And that's what had to happen. I didn't realize it. It was the toughest time of my life. I'm a guy who you can probably tell is pretty joyful. And I would come home from work. I didn't have any joy. It got to the point where I told Kyle And I told my wife, I said, I think I'm gonna fill up an aquarium with 500 marbles. And every day I go into work, I'm gonna take one marble out. And in a year and a half, when I've lost all my marbles, I'm just gonna resign and do something else. Maybe I was supposed to be the in-between guy. Maybe God just had me there for 2 years, you know? And I told that to those two. But I had a great eldership that stood behind me and helped me through that time. It got so bad that I would drive past the church on the interstate. And all my life, every time I would drive past on that interstate, I would glance over at that church building. It got to the point where I couldn't look at my own church. Because I was so sick to my stomach at just all the issues coming at me and feeling the weight of, oh, have you blown it? You know, somebody gave the 16-year-old a set of car keys, and have you wrecked the church? Have you wrecked the car? And so I wouldn't even look at my own church. But I wrestled with all that because for 17 years when I would fall asleep at night, I always knew that there was one person on an org chart who was above me named Bob Russell, and he would fall asleep with all that pressure of all the staff issues and all the church issues and all the community issues. And so I went on this spiritual journey, and I know it'll sound really crazy to you because this was my epiphany. I finally realized that there was another box that was higher than the senior pastor. And it was the one who bought the church with his own blood. And it's his church and it's not my church. And that's what I finally came to grips with. And I know it sounds like, okay, you really should have known that. And I realized that. I did know it, but I had to believe it. And I had to live like I believed it. And so from that point on, I really think I moved from leading out of fear instead leading out of faith. So I think that all of that ties in with humility because I go back to Matthew 23. God opposes the proud and he gives grace to the humble. So maybe God was showing me, you know, you're too big for your britches and you think that this is just going to come easily and naturally, and it's not, and it's going to be hard work. And the only way that you'll be able to lead this church is when my power is made perfect in your weakness, because that's when he does his best work. So, a lot more than I planned on sharing. I just felt like I needed a good cry today. So, second habit. Exceptional leaders learn how to handle criticism. Exceptional leaders learn how to handle criticism. If you lead even a handful of people, you will always have those who disagree. There will always be anonymous letters. There will always be social media comments. There'll be people who disagree with you. There'll be people who are mad because their relative that lost their job at the church or who is no longer a deacon or whatever it might be. And you're just going to have shots taken at you. So you have to understand that. In a volunteer role, you will have people, you know, well, who died and made you king? So you're the lead volunteer. You're no different than I am. I'm a volunteer too. Proverbs 15:1 says, a gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. And a great leader knows that whenever you are criticized, before you respond, you first sit on that, and you don't respond in anger. You look for any truth in the criticism. Is there some truth in this? What do I need to own? Ask someone that you trust, you know, hey, read over this, you know, what do you think of this? Bob Russell used to come next door to me, and he'd be fired up about some letter somebody had fired off to him, and he'd say, read this. That'd be the letter from the person. He'd say, okay, now read that. That's what I wrote back to them. Have you seen it yet? No, just read it. Okay, all right, read it. Okay, well, you can't cuss, Bob. You know, you can't. No, That's a joke. All right. I said, boy, you're kind of harsh. You really comes across like you're really mad in that third paragraph. Well, I am mad. Well, the 6 exclamation points. You might take 5 of those away, And he just would come in. He didn't have to show me those things, but why would he do that? Well, one, he was preparing me for when I was in that seat. But the other thing that he was doing was sometimes you just need to blow off some steam. And you get that off, and then, okay, yeah, I know I need to soften. I'll soften that part. I'll soften that part. So you have to kind of know when to respond and when not to. I preach at a church in Phoenix called Christ Church of the Valley, and I speak there about 8 weekends a year, and I'm on their preaching team. And, when I started going there about 7 years ago, I would make Kentucky jokes, and I'd pick on, I'd call myself a hillbilly and all these different things. And I did that probably 3 out of the first 6 sermons that I did. And I got a pretty nasty letter from a gal. And she said this to me. She said, "Please don't tell those jokes. You're making things more difficult for us. We moved from Kentucky to Arizona, and people already literally think that everyone back home is barefoot and toothless and pregnant." And then she wrote, she said, "Don't make it any tougher than it is." And she was dead serious. I'm giving you the abridged version of it, all right? But she was fired up that I would make jokes about Kentucky like that. Now, do I just absorb that, or do I respond to that? Do I worry over that and take valuable time and get my laptop out, carefully craft a letter? "I am so sorry that my exaggerated comments offended you. The intent of my self-deprecating humor was not to make your life more difficult. In the future, I will be more sensitive to the feelings of those who have moved out west from the more rural states. Please forgive me for overstepping that boundary. I'm so sorry. I will never do it again." Now, do I write that out? Do I take 15 or 20 minutes of my life to word that and to write that? Or do I just let it go and move on? And I always pray about it, and I prayed about it then, and I decided it just wasn't the best use of my time. It wasn't worth it. Because if I wrote back and explained myself to that former Kentuckian, then they would have to find a friend who knows how to read. And then have to read that to her and explain it to her. It's just not worth all that time, all right? By the way, if you're keeping score, that's truth, exaggeration, and surprise. That's all 3. Bingo! What I'm saying is choose your battles wisely, all right? Jesus, throughout his ministry, showed us why he was the ultimate leader. In some settings, when he was being trapped by people with some question, he would use his knowledge to answer them or to reply to them with a tougher question of his own. I mean, you don't try to get in a verbal battle with Jesus. I mean, that's just stupid, right? But other times, he would just allow people to take their shots because they didn't understand the difference between a political kingdom and a spiritual kingdom. Think back to a time in Mark chapter 15. There's one time where Jesus answers Pilate, and then there's another time when Jesus doesn't answer Pilate. In Mark 15, 1 and 2, they bound Jesus and they led him away and they delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." So why does Jesus respond then? Well, if he didn't respond then, he would be denying his own deity. And so he speaks up and he affirms that he is the king of the Jews. After all, he is the King of Kings and he is the Lord of Lords. Now, Mark 15, verses 3 through 5, the next verses, the chief priests accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further answer, so Pilate was amazed. Why didn't Jesus take the bait? Why didn't Jesus answer Pilate on this second time? It's because Jesus knows that if he opens his mouth, it would be so easy for him to answer the charges and give a perfectly reasonable counter-argument with his eloquence and his wisdom. He could have systematically gotten every single charge dropped. You see, sometimes leaders remain silent and they absorb the criticism in order to advance their mission. And that's what Jesus is doing. He's advancing his mission. And so he remains silent and he allows evil to take its course. Why? Because Jesus came to seek and to save that which was lost. That's why he came. And so that's why he doesn't give an answer. He is the means of salvation. He is the way, the truth, and the life. So sometimes you respond to criticism, and other times you just absorb it. Habit number 3, make an effort to learn people's names. I started this at a very early age because I just found a huge payback for it. I know you're going to think I'm crazy. I just can't tell you how big this is. You say, well, it's just a name. I mean, Caroline or Carolyn, let me tell you, if you're a Caroline, you're a Carolyn, you know the difference, all right? Thank you very much. Thank you for the Kleenex. Thank you. If you are, I talked to a Laura. Where's Laura? I talked to a Laura at the break. Laura, Laura. She's what? Cleaning up in the kitchen, serving. Great. It's a lot better than saying she's sleeping in the back row. But I promise you, if you find out there's a difference between, I don't know if you noticed, Laura and Laura. One is Laura and the other is Lora. That means something to them in how you say it. Caroline, Carolyn, Dave, David, what's your preference? People are nice and they'll say, I answer to anything. That may be true, but, if you go to the trouble of learning their name, the way they prefer it, that means something to them. And I just would say the bar is set so low. Now, we've had some, at my church, we had Harry Truman, we had Jennifer Lopez, we had a girl named River Banks. That's a cool name, right? My friend Michael Clear, he married a girl named Crystal. I think it's funny. My youth minister, Kevin Oder. Somebody told me Kevin Oder earlier. They knew Kevin. Kevin Oder's dad's name. Are you ready for this? Ivan. You got it. Ivan Oder. Well, I appreciate your honesty. What do you say to a person that introduces himself as Ivan Oder? Okay, well, you can, there's things you can do about that. There's products for that now. So it sounds like more of a confession than an introduction, I know. But at one of our family dedication services a few years ago, I'd be in the back, and if you ever do a baby dedication or family dedication, man, you got to get those names right because there are grandparents out there. And those grandparents, they will leave your church over that, Well, did you leave over something doctrinal? No. Caroline instead of Carolyn. Not going to go there. Now I'm a Buddhist. So they're going to change over something like that. But I'm going through all the names, and I read one person's name, and the little baby's name. Are you ready for this? Henry Bachweg the Ninth. I said, hey, let me just make certain that this isn't a typo. I said, Taylor, is that right? Is it Henry the Ninth? She said, yeah, it's Henry the Ninth. She said, so pray for me. I'm married to Henry the Eighth. You talk about peer pressure. You talk about family pressure. When that baby's coming along, you know it's going to be a boy, Grandma and Mom are looking, and Dad's looking, and everybody's looking at him like, okay, all right, Henry the Ninth, Golly, boy, that's pressure. But names are important. And so the more we can do to work at this, you say, so what are some things that you do? Well, this is what I do. My phone is filled with names. That's all it is. I go to the note page, and you tell me the place. You tell me whatever it is. I've got every restaurant. I've got every worker down. There's Wild Eggs. There's Biscuit Belly. There's Texas Roadhouse. There's Pliable. I've got 30 names under Pliable. If you go to Delta Airlines, you go to TSA. I've got restaurants, non-restaurant. I got it by counties. I've got it by church hours, by worship service times. You say, well, why would you do that? You might never see that person again. You're right, I might not. But you know what I found? If I can call that person by name, the second time they come, a really big church gets really small. And it gets really personal. And they say, he knows my name. And if he knows my name, he'll know my story. He'll get to know me. So I know every post office person, everybody in the post office. I know every bank teller. And so you say, well, what's important about that? Well, I know which ones like donuts. I bring Krispy Kreme donuts every once in a while. I just walk in the post office. There'll be a long line. I just walk in. And people think I work for DoorDash. You know, I'll just come in. I'll just say, hey, here's your donuts for you, okay? And they're, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. And people in line are like, yeah, it's so sad. Dave Stoney used to preach, and now he's doing DoorDash, you know? But what that means to them. So here's my point. You say, okay, you make a game out of it. What's so great about this? When Easter comes around and I walk in the post office and I invite them to come to a service, you think the odds are better or worse that they'll say yes? Because of the fact I call them by name. I sent everyone in my Christmas card. They started putting them up in their little booths. Their little booth there where you go in the post office. They got my family's picture up. So they don't know I'm a pastor. So people come in and say, oh, do you go to Southeast? No. Well, do you know the Stones? Oh, yeah, he comes in here. They come in here. Yeah, they bring us donuts every once in a while. Yeah, oh, great. I've got a cell phone number. And he asks me to send him prayer requests sometimes. I've got a prayer request. But they don't know I'm a pastor. You think when I invite them or when one of those people invites them to come to church, you think they'll come hear me preach? I think they probably will. So my point is, look for those opportunities. The bar is set so stinking low. When you remember somebody's name, it's like, whoa, you remembered my name. Yeah, because when you work at it and you remember somebody's name, they move instantly from an acquaintance to a friend. Just like that. All because you went to the bother of just learning their name. And you can cheat. You can cheat with your phone all the time. My son and I will be walking into the restaurant and he's looking at his phone, I'm looking at mine, and he'll say, hey, you know the new bus boy is Brandon. Remember Brandon? Brandon's he got the black bushy hair. Okay, I got him. Anybody else? He'll tell me somebody else. And then you go in, and now all of a sudden, you've got a relationship with them. Somebody went to that Japanese restaurant with us one time. We walked in. At that time, our family had 4 people. One of our daughters was already gone. And they got seated at the table. Well, it was another 5 minutes before any of our 4 family members sat down. And then when we got up to leave, a couple hours later, when we left, we walked around, and this family that went with us, they're standing at the door. And we walked outside. They said, you know, it's really strange. When you all go to eat, it's different than when we go to eat. I said, well, how's it different? Tammy said, well, when we go to a restaurant, we go to eat. I said, yeah? And she said, and when you guys go to restaurants, you go to talk to all the workers. And I got in my car. You know what our family mission statement is? Go to heaven when we die and take as many people with us as we can. So all we're doing is our family's just trying to live on mission. That's all we're doing. And when you learn somebody's name, it's powerful. Abraham heard his name called. How about when Samuel heard his name called by God? How about when Peter heard it? How about when Lazarus heard it? You know why Jesus used his name there. If he hadn't said Lazarus, everybody would have come out of the grave. And so Jesus specifies and says, Lazarus, come out. You know what my favorite story is? It's in the Gospel of John. It's Mary. Mary felt this incredible closeness to Jesus. Here's what I want you to get. She has this conversation with the person that she thinks is the gardener. Okay? We think when we read the story, oh, well, she recognizes his voice. And that's how she knew it was Jesus. Not so. Read it again. She doesn't recognize him when he says something to her. You know when he recognizes her, she recognizes him? It's when he says, Mary. He says, who are you looking for? Doesn't register with her. No, where have you taken him? Where is he? Who is it that you're looking for? Jesus, Nazareth. He says one word, Mary. And when she hears her name, she falls to her knees and she clings to him. Something happens when a person hears their name. Don't miss the opportunity. Okay. Last one. Exceptional leaders cultivate a prayer life. Exceptional leaders cultivate a prayer life. I can't stress how important this is, because when you cultivate a prayer life, you are saying, okay, Lord, it's in your hands, it's not in my hands. And you're going to be the one who does the work. And I don't care what you do in ministry, that is so important. Years ago, I was talking to a guy who works in an area, a Muslim nation. He's had death threats. He has a secret passageway hidden in where he lives. He's been stoned before. They've come to kill him on several different occasions. And I said to him one time, I said, Daniel, I said, how much do you pray? Or how often do you pray? Or what's your prayer time look like? He said, well, I get up in the morning, and he said, I spend 3 hours in prayer. I just was so taken back by that. And I said, well, I just can't imagine that. And he looked at me like, oh, you got to be kidding me. He looked at me and said, not to pray would be suicide. And that's the mindset that I think we need to get, that if God's going to do something in our lives and God's going to do something in our churches, then it's going to come through prayer and having that communication with him. Several years ago when we had a new chairman of the elders came, he came to me with an idea. He said, hey, I know we get together first Tuesday of every month for an elders meeting. He said, what if we got together and we met at 7 a.m. and we prayed at 7 a.m. every Tuesday that we're not having elders meeting the other 3 weeks? And I'm not a morning person. Where's my morning people? Put your hands up. How many of y'all like to wake up early in the morning? Look at you all, man. Okay? Where's the rest of us? Festivus, the rest of us, yes. So I'm like, I could go for a 10:30 at night prayer time if we just did that. You know, that would be really cool. But he said, let's do it at 7 o'clock. He said, I think it'd be really healthy for our elders to do that every Tuesday. And I said, I got another idea. Why don't we do it every other week? And that way, we're still meeting together twice as much as we ever would. And he thought about it for a while, and he said, let's do it every week. I said, okay. So he won and I lost. But after doing it for 15 years, we all won. Because what that did for our church and what it did for our eldership was we saw people hearing a baby cry somewhere or something, or a mouse, or what that did for our church was elders began to see each other in a different light. Because instead of just seeing each other in meetings, now they saw them in a different way, because they were sharing their prayer requests, and they were saying, would you pray for my teenage son who's walking away from the Lord? Would you pray for this health battle that my wife is going through? Would you pray for... And all of a sudden, we got bound tighter than we've ever been bound. I'll close with this story. A number of years ago, I preached for a church in Dallas. I was invited to come. A guy named Rick Atchley. Richland Hills Church was the name of the church at that time. He invited me to come, and he said, hey, bring your golf clubs with you. He said, I think I'm going to be able to get us on Preston Trails Golf Club. I said, wow, that would be awesome. It's one of the most prestigious courses in Dallas, and the reason why is not so much the course is incredible, don't get me wrong, but Byron Nelson is the guy who designed that course. If you're a golfer, Byron Nelson arguably may have been the best golfer of all time. At one point, he won 11 consecutive tournaments. And Tiger in his prime one time won 5 in a row. Byron Nelson won 11 tournaments in a row, lost by 1 stroke, and then won another 4 in a row after that. He dominated the sport. And so in Dallas, he is kind of the man in the golf world. And so we went and played golf. and it was incredible. And the greens were immaculate, and the course was gorgeous. And I baptized many golf balls that day in lakes and ponds. But that wasn't the highlight of my day for me. You say, well, you love to play golf. How wasn't that the highlight, to get to play on this incredible course with caddies and have so much fun? That wasn't the highlight. The highlight was that Wednesday night, that night, when I preached at his church, and I was shaking hands afterwards in the lobby, and I'm getting ready to leave to go meet with their elders for a meeting. I was going to get to speak to them for an hour. As I'm getting ready to leave, somebody grabs my arm and says, that was a great sermon you gave there. And I turned around, and it was Byron Nelson. And he was a member of that church. He was 89 years old, and he was in church on Wednesday night. He said, I sure enjoyed that message. And as I shook his hand, I could feel my hand shaking. And I said, I sure enjoyed your course today. I said, I got to play Preston Trail today. Oh, that's a good track. I'm glad you had fun. And I put that group of elders on hold for the next 10 minutes, and I was in my own little world. And we talked about church, golf, and Jesus. And that became the highlight of my day. You see, it's one thing to play the course. It's another thing to get to know the designer. And when you pray, what you are saying is, I want to get to know the designer. It's one thing to take communion. It's another thing to know the person personally who died in your place. It's one thing to sing a worship song. It's another thing to worship and to fall on your knees and say, I am not worthy of the grace that you have given to me. That's what happens when you have that relationship. And if there's one of these 4 habits that you know you need to work on, I pray that you'll dive into it. And you'll say, this is the one I need to work on more than the others, whichever one of those 4 it might be. But don't leave out the prayer piece, because that's where the power is. Let's pray. Lord, we honor you, and we praise you. We confess that there are times when we haven't given you the time in our prayers that you deserve. And we pledge that we will do better. Help us to be the leaders and the servants that you have called us to be. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.